French President Emmanuel Macron is pushing to add abortion language to the country's constitution. This would invent a right to end the lives of babies in the womb and put women at risk. In France, it is already broadly legal to end the life of a baby in utero up to 14 weeks old. But President Macron says his motivation to add abortion to the constitution is so that, quote, the right of women to choose abortion will become irreversible. France's National Assembly has introduced a bill that coincides with the president's plan, but it has to gain majority support in the conservative-leaning Senate before final approval. We're joined now by Solène Tadié of the National Catholic Register for analysis. Solène, thank you for being here. You're a French woman and a successful one at that. What's your reaction to President Macron's desire to add abortion to the Constitution to give more rights to French women?
Well, in concrete terms, according to many legal experts, this measure will not change the right to abortion itself in France, which is already guaranteed by French law.
Sure.
But it is more of a cosmetic measure, a communication tool used by President Macron in reaction to the 2022 US Supreme Court decision. It's a kind of message that he wants to send to the world, particularly to the US, with that. And at the same time, a kind of bone to chew on for the left and feminist groups. Other experts have pointed out that no state in the world has ever enshrined such a right to abortion in its constitution, with the exception of Tito's communist former Yugoslavia. So its use of the constitution as a means of communication leads many legal experts in France to fear that the constitution could be in the future transformed into some kind of normative self-service to be used at the whim of politicians, to enshrine categorical claims in which each lobby group could demand this or that enforceable right according to the societal demands of the moment. So it's real danger.
Yeah, it's devastating that the president would want to send such a fatal message. Solène, can you explain the history of abortion law in France? And do you think the president has the backing of his people on this?
So yeah, abortion has been legal in France since 1975 with the so-called Veil law. It allows any pregnant woman to terminate her pregnancy without having to provide any justification. It's a right to which a very large majority of French people are attached, very much attached. Almost 90% of them, according to recent polls. I don't know how much we can trust these polls, but that's the numbers, and I think that's pretty much accurate. And so now the project to enshrine this right to abortion in the French constitution is moving forward. So with the support of the population, following on Tuesday, January 30, the adoption of a formal vote by the National Assembly. And so the special aim is to enshrine the notion of guaranteed freedom in the Constitution. So that's the topic on which the Senate will now have to vote, on this very notion of guaranteed freedom. And it will be done by the end of February.
So lots of work to be done in the realm of public opinion, it seems. Solène, President Macron and other French leaders, you've alluded to this, they're saying that this is a reaction to our Supreme Court here in the United States overturning Roe versus Wade. Does it concern you that American policies pertaining to abortion have such a great impact on the rest of the world, especially your native France?
Yeah, it's the fact that we can instrumentalize law to promote ideology. We can instrumentalize constitution, which are usually a shrine, as a sanctuary of a guarantee of freedom for individuals, and not just a tool that can be used by passing politicians. What is quite interesting is that most commentators in France over the past 2 years thought that this bill would pass very easily because of, like I said, the public opinion is overwhelming in favor of that. But it might not be so easy because several senators have already protested against such a bill. Although last year they passed a similar law, but in different terms to those now being proposed. The aim was to add to the Constitution the fact that the law determines the conditions in which a woman's freedom to terminate a pregnancy is used, which is different from the pure guaranteed freedom that we have now. So the pro-life association, I would mention that Alliance Vita, that is the main pro-life organization, has strongly opposed the project so far, claiming it's a real threat. It poses a serious threat to other freedoms, and it opens the way in the long term for the legislator to abolish purely and simply the conscience clause for medical staff. or to extend the time limits for abortion. You mentioned that it was extended to 14 weeks in 2022. Nothing can predict that they won't do the same again after such a law is enshrined in the Constitution.
And I'm glad you brought this up. I wanted to ask you about the pro-life presence in France. Is there any sort of pro-life resistance that you can kind of speak to more when it comes to this potential right being added to your constitution?
The pro-life movements in France are, to say the least, very determined, but much less powerful than in the US. That's a certainty, because they clash with a very deeply rooted culture in France that is predominant since the end of World War II. And anyone who dares to display their pro-life views in France are constantly ridiculed in the media, insulted, threatened, banned from public debate. The fact remains, however, that the activists are very committed. I'm sure they will continue to take the streets throughout this legal process, but they are quite unlikely to be heard. Only the senators will be able to change anything from now on. So we'll see what the Senate says.
Yes. Well, Solène, thank you so much for joining us. Solène Tadié of EWTN News. So grateful for your analysis.
Thank you for having me.